Hi folks, this tutorial will cover the powerful new face keyframing functions in iClone 7. Users already familiar with previous iClone versions will know that face key is a way of fine-tuning as well as building up a character's facial expressions at any point on the timeline. But whereas previous versions only allowed basic control, in iClone 7 the whole system has been upgraded to allow a much more intuitive and powerful level of fine-tuning through direct feature manipulation. The instant access of full face expressions from a library of presets, as well as full access to all available morphs through sliders, including any custom morphs which you may have built for your character. The new face key system can be used to create detailed facial animations from scratch and used with FacePuppet as well as iClone's coming facial motion capture plugin. Let's get started. The new face key interface has three individual tabs: Muscle, Expression and Modify. We'll start with expressions since this is the quickest possible way to create keyframes of full face expressions. The library here, accessible by the drop-down on the top right, includes many subtle and more expressive variations on the primary emotions of happy, sad, angry, disgust, fear and surprise, as well as an additional set of miscellaneous expressions which may be useful in particular scenarios. Let's run through some examples, starting with variations on happy, now sad, now angry, now disgust, now fear, now surprise, now a few others, maybe for playing the trumpet or drinking through a straw. Now you'll notice that there's an expressiveness slider at the bottom of the panel. Use this if you want to make an expression more subtle by dragging to the left. Also, on the bottom right, there's a reset button which allows you to revert from your currently applied expression to the previous expression you had applied. I'll be doing a much more comprehensive tutorial on timeline editing in the next tutorial, but I think it's worth taking a first look at the timeline as we apply some expressions. You'll see that the new iClone 7 expression timeline has three individual keyframe tracks. These are for muscle, eye and head rotation respectively. At this stage, we're just looking at the muscle keys, since these are the keyframes which are applied by the expression panel. I'll create a very quick animation here going from happy to sad to surprised expressions with just three keyframes. Now that works, but the timing isn't very good and it looks quite artificial. So let's simply copy, paste and move a few of these keys to improve the timing a little. Now let's change the transition curve on these keys from linear to ease in, ease out to make the animation a little smoother. But what if I want to fine-tune these expressions and maybe return the character to its original neutral expression at some point in the timeline? Well, I can use the expressiveness slider to make an expression more subtle. However, it's important to note that the expressiveness slider is a global control throughout face key. So when you have it set low in a particular timeline area, all new keys applied in that area except default keys will have the existing expressiveness value unless you change it. You'll see that each time I use the slider at a new point in the timeline, a new key is created. And I can use this slider to set keys to vary the degree of expression at any particular point. But to really start fine-tuning facial expressions and to change them to exactly what you're looking for, it's time to start looking at the muscle panel. This interface will appear familiar to experienced iClone users, though the new approach is much more comprehensive than previous versions. Here we have a feature selection head along with head rotation and tilt buttons, as well as the expressiveness slider and a button for default key. Let's apply that default key along the timeline. You'll see that new keyframes are created for muscle, eye and head, returning the character to its default neutral expression. When building up animations, you'll find using the default key to be an extremely useful tool, allowing you to instantly return to a blank canvas if you want the character to appear neutral, or to start building up or applying a new facial expression. Okay, let's look at the new solo feature selection approach in the face key muscle panel. I'm just hovering the mouse over different muscle groups. You'll see that there are many more selection areas available than in previous versions of iClone. Let's try out a few of these. First, I'm showing different eyebrow variations, selecting single as well as multiple control points and dragging the mouse to show the effects of these. Now for the eyes. Both upper and lower eyelids, as well as eyeballs, can be handled separately or together depending on what expression you're looking for. Control points are selected simply by left-clicking, and once selected, you can deselect simply by left-clicking again on the selected point, or deselect all selections by clicking the eraser button on the top right. To save time, there's also a symmetrical selection checkbox, which means you can select points on one side of the face, and the points on the other side will automatically be selected too. You'll find that the mouth area, both the lips themselves as well as the muscles around the mouth, have been upgraded enormously so that you can keyframe all sorts of closed and open lip expressions, including lateral mouth movements. Similarly, the jaw can be opened vertically as well as moved from side to side. Now, there's a lot to get used to with the new muscle key approach, so it's really worth spending some time trying out each feature as well as the various combinations, in order to get a feel of how this approach works. And remember, you can revert to the default at any point simply by pressing the default key button. So let's spend a little time tweaking the existing animation using the muscle panel in Face Key. I'm running through the timeline looking for keyframes which aren't working very well, and whilst I could delete those individual keyframes and create new expressions at those points, instead I'm using the muscle panel here to modify the expressions to get the results which I'm looking for. Now let's add some eye rotation and some head rotation keys to the animation. As you can see on the timeline here, we already have keyframes for the eyes and the head, but remember these were set simply by applying the default key button from the muscle key panel. So we'll delete these and then create the keyframes. First, I'll select the eyeballs and the upper eyelids so that the motion is associated, though obviously you can work with these separately. I'll just set a few keys with these. You'll notice that once I create a key where the eyes change direction, I create another similar key following that in order to emphasize the movement before changing the eye motion again. This creates a more natural and focused effect rather than see the eyes wander around aimlessly. In terms of head motion, this generally follows, or at the very most, moves at the same speed as the eye focus. So I'm just putting a few general keyframes in here to match up with the eyes. Now both eye and head focus can also be controlled by the look at function on the modify panel. And there are lots of other ways of controlling head rotation too, but here I'm showing you the simple face key method. Okay, now we'll move to the third and final face key interface, the modify panel. Here you have 5 different sections containing sliders, accessible by the buttons at the top with icons representing brows, eyes, nose, which also includes cheeks, mouth, as well as a custom section on the right for any custom morphs which you've embedded into your character through 3D Exchange. This panel gives you direct access to each of the available morphs which drive facial animation in iClone. And you'll see that as you move along the timeline with face keys already in place, these sliders are constantly reacting, showing which morphs are being applied at any particular time. Now, this isn't simply for display. At any point, you can change these values, whether to modify and fine-tune an existing expression, or to create altogether new facial expressions. So let's use some modify sliders to tweak the existing animation, starting off with the brows. Next, we'll adjust the eyes. Then the nose, and finally we'll make some slider adjustments to the mouth. And another tip, if you want to make a smooth looping animation, simply copy the keys at the start of the timeline to the end of the timeline. So we've looked at how to use FaceKey to create and modify keyframes within a single clip, but what about editing the clip itself? First, let's see exactly how clips are created. I'll remove the current clip and we'll look at this in more detail. I'm using the expression panel to add keys quickly along the timeline. Notice that each time I apply a key, the clip, shown in the top bar of the expression panel, is extended. Now, you can edit keys within a clip as much as you wish, just as we did before, by adding, moving, deleting and copying and pasting keyframes. But as you build up keyframes in an animation, you may find the timeline of the current clip is getting cluttered. You also may want to break the clip into pieces in order to move whole sections around more easily. So let's look at the right-click menu on the clip itself. Here you'll see two very specific functions beneath the normal clip editing functions. These are Flatten Expression Clip and Sample Expression Clip. Let's see what they do. First, Flatten. Notice that the individual keys within the clip disappear. But if we drag through the timeline, you can see that whilst the keys you've set are no longer visible, they're still there, only they've been flattened or embedded into the main clip itself. The way to think of this is in layers. Once you've flattened a clip, you can then start a new layer of keyframing as before, and you can keep on doing this until you're happy with the animation. But it's important to note, when you flatten an expression clip, the clip itself then becomes the default animation layer. So unlike when you're creating a new animation clip, if you add a default key to a flattened clip, the expression you'll see will be the expression currently embedded in the clip itself. This is an important point to be aware of when flattening animation clips. Okay, let's undo that and return to the original keyframes. Then look at the sample expression clip function. Here, instead of the keys disappearing from the timeline, you'll see that the three tracks under the expression clip are now fully populated with keyframes. And whilst the animation remains the same, you now have automatically generated keys for every frame in the animation. This means that all tweening, or in-between frames from your original keys, are now available for frame-by-frame detailed editing if you wish. You can also alternate between sampling and flattening the clip, but it's important to be aware that once you have taken either or both of these steps, your original separate keyframes are no longer available unless you undo. So, returning to the original clip, another reason for spending some time explaining the difference between flattening and sampling clips is because when it comes to breaking clips in iClone 7, keyframes are auto-sampled in order to maintain their original transitions. Let's see what happens when I break this clip. As you can see, the broken clips are sampled, and we now have keys auto-generated on all frames. So if you want to continue key editing in these individual clips without working on an individual frame-by-frame basis, the trick is to flatten either before or after you decide to break your original clip. Then you can continue face key editing as before. And of course, once you have separated your original clip into parts using the break function, you can then edit these clips by moving, as well as deleting, cutting, copying and pasting from the right-click menu, as well as using the speed and loop functions from the timeline menu itself to increase and reduce speed, as well as to repeat particular clips where you want them. Now, just to finish off, I'm showing face key timelines for the animation I started this tutorial with. Apart from a little body keying with Edit Motion layer, the facial animation was simply built up using iClone's new face key approach. This has been a demonstration of the new face key functionality in iClone 7. In the next, more advanced tutorial, I'll explain how to combine face key with face puppet and a lip sync track in order to produce complete contextual facial animation. Meanwhile, I hope this tutorial has been of interest, and thanks for watching.